All right, welcome back to our podcast series, The 20-Minute Investor, where we bring you actionable nuggets and insights from our real estate investing journeys in bite-sized 20-minute episodes. I'm Aaron Amin. My wife and I built a portfolio of 8 cash-flowing rentals across 3 states while working full-time and raising a young family.
And I'm Nathan. I'm a husband, father, a tech executive who's built a portfolio of cash-flowing rentals over 2,000 miles away.
Together, we co-founded the Remote Real Estate Academy, where we coach investors on how to build their own portfolios of cash-flowing rentals from anywhere in the world. This week, we have a fun little deep dive into some of the personal finance strategies that Mr. Nathan here uses, because I've long been fascinated by these topics, and we've never sat down to discuss them at length. And actually, I thought it would be fun to do it on the podcast so that everyone could benefit from the answers here. So there's 2 things that I've always been struck by that you've done, and I think you've done really well, and there's good rationale behind them, but they're not as obvious as people might think. So in no particular order, you tell me which one you want to jump into first. Number 1, you have chosen to use rental properties as a more or less like a piggy bank or college fund using, I believe, accelerated loan pay down, but I would love for you to peel back into that. And then second, you use interest-only payments for the mortgage on your primary residence. And I'm very fascinated by both those topics. So you tell me which one you want to start with.
Let's start with the first, the less controversial one, maybe.
All right. So the college fund, using a rental property as a college fund. How does it work, and why did you choose to do it?
So first, which unfortunately I can't for the life of me remember where I heard this, but this is not my idea. I heard this, someone said it somewhere, or I read it somewhere, or saw it on some YouTube video, whatever it is, even before we purchased our first rental property. But I heard this person, it might have been Brandon Turner, I don't know, I can't remember, but the whole idea was, or what I heard was, their kid was born. When their kid was born, they purchased this rental property on a 15-year mortgage, and that by the time the kid would be, college age, that property would be paid off and could be used as a way to fund the kid's college tuition, essentially, with this rental property, either by refinancing that property and pulling a bunch of money out to pay for college, using the, free, rental income from that property to, monthly income to pay for, college, or to maybe potentially sell that property and, recoup the money and pay for school. So I heard that idea and I thought it was fantastic. And that's essentially what we did for both of our kids. And the way I looked at it is like, I can get into a rental property for, let's call it, $40,000 or $50,000 down payment. And over 15, 20 years, whatever it is, 30 years, whatever your timeline is, the property value is going to increase. The mortgage is going to get paid down by your tenant. And, by the time my kids are college age, this property will be worth, and I pulled up some numbers here so we can go into an actual example, but this property is going to be worth however many hundreds of thousands of dollars, which is hundreds of thousands of dollars that I can use to pay for this fund, but for which I only put $50,000 down of my own money. Whereas the more classic alternative route, I never remember because I don't use it, 529B, 520, what are those accounts? Something like that, right?
520.
Whatever they are. But like those, well, yes, I understand we're going to debate this. There's interest that accrues over time and it compounds. I understand that. But to fund a 529 to the tune of $200,000, that's $200,000, again, give or take the compounding interest over time, but that's $200,000 of my own money that I need to find every month, every year, however often you want to deposit and contribute to it, to fund your kid's college fund, right? So in one scenario, I used $50,000 of my own money and I got my $200,000 or whatever for my college fund. In the other scenario, I've had to find $160,000, $70,000 of my own money to get to that same $200,000 college fund. So which is better in your opinion? I mean, it's pretty straightforward to me. So that's the whole premise behind it, basically.
Yeah, and that's why I kind of say it's like a non-obvious solution, but when you model it out next to each other, it does make sense. Now, with a 529 account, the best of my understanding, because I have one for my daughter, but I actually, after opening it, kind of decided that that wasn't going to be the primary vehicle. Also, we had 3 kids, and literally it would be probably impossible based on our current income to seed enough money into 3 separate 529 accounts over the next 18 years.
Exactly.
To cover whatever the cost of college will be 18 years from now. It just mathematically doesn't compute. So you almost need a strategy that has some type of leverage, like what you mentioned, in order to be able to afford college in that sense. But a 529 account, you invest in it. It has almost similar mechanism to a 401k where the money that's invested in there, you typically can select some target date funds. They're more aggressive than a 401k typically because the kids are younger. It has an 18-year time horizon, a few different reasons, right? But it's not like full risk on growth stocks, but it's also not CDs and like the lowest possible returns. So the idea is that you drive some sort of return over, and you let 18 years of compounding do the trick. But if you're not regularly contributing to it, or if you don't have a really large initial contribution, that compounding is powerful, but it's not going to be powerful enough to pay for college if you only put $5,000 in, or if you only put $2,000 a year or something. It's just not you're not going to get there. With the accelerated loan pay down, you can benefit from that and hopefully have the property paid off by the time they're in college. But you also have cash flow. If the property is in fact paid off, they don't have to sell the property. You could refi, you could use the cash flow. There's a number of different ways that asset can provide value for your kid, which of course it's a benefit for your kid. It's also a benefit for you because you didn't have to save $200,000 or whatever the cost of college will be down the road.
Didn't have to save $200,000. That's true, but there's also 15 to 20 years of me being able to use the cash flow that it generates. So I'm getting money and not having to put money aside to pay for this college fund over 20 years. So yeah, that's the whole idea basically.
So correct me if I'm wrong though, right? If you want to pay it off in 18 years, you're going to have to accelerate the loan pay down, which means probably there's a pretty thin cash flow, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So this is a time in the market thing where over, even if it's 15 years, let's call it the lower end, your rents are going to go up, and it's just the property value is going to go up, right? So it's actually not that bad. And like I said, I have an example here we can dive into, but that's the other thing that oftentimes when I talk about this, I hear people kind of push back on or be skeptical about. It's technically these properties, we have put them on a 30-year mortgage, but we are making the choice of paying down that mortgage faster so that by the time they're college aged, so 18 years, 15 years, depending on when you buy that property is free and clear by the time they reach college age. And that's primarily to give ourselves optionality and control. So I could choose to pay down over 30 years if I want to, or I could choose to pay down over, 10 years or 15 or 18 or whatever it is if I want to. Whereas if you have a 15-year mortgage, then you have 15 years to pay down that mortgage. Not only that, but obviously maybe for those who looked at this before, but a 30-year mortgage, your monthly payment will be lower than a 15-year mortgage. So you get more cash flow. So yeah, so we do that. I mean, we could jump into the numbers here for this one if you want. I mean, this is
run it down.
Let's
make it real.
So this is one of the properties that we purchased as a college fund for one of our kids. So we bought it for $130,000, I think, if I remember correctly. So roughly, let's call it $40,000 down payment plus closing costs or whatever. So $40,000 out of pocket. Right now, that property generates, after all reserves, all expenses, everything set aside, paid the mortgage, paid property taxes, paid insurance, that property right now for us generates $430 a month of cash flow.
Is that before or after the accelerated principal pay down?
Before the accelerated pay down. So I have $400 a month, $430 a month that I could choose what to do with. I could pay down the mortgage, $430, extra every month. I could pay down the mortgage $100 or $200. I could pick. Typically what I like to do is I will let the property cash flow for an entire year, see how much it generated. And at the end of the year, when I do my books and bookkeeping and get ready for taxes, I pick a certain number of money that I'll pay an extra payment for the mortgage. That's how I do it. I'm not saying right or wrong. But what's more interesting with this is, so the property was purchased for $130,000. By year 20, I'm not saying 18 because my projection and calculator here has year 10 and 20. So let's say 20 is close enough. By year 20, that property, with a relatively conservative 3% appreciation over the year over year, will be worth over $315,000. So if you pay it off in 20 years with like those additional mortgage payments, monthly, annually, however you want to do it, you essentially have a piggy bank, quote unquote, of $316,000, sorry, dollars that you can use for a college fund. That's a pretty sweet college fund.
And it's cash
So
flowing.
and it's cash flowing, absolutely. And I'm going to get to that in a second. But when you get to those paid off, properties, $315,000, you could sell it. And yes, there'll be taxes and fees and all that stuff. So whatever's left becomes your college fund. You can refi, pull out, 80% of that, refinance, and now you have essentially your college fund through the refi, because you're keep the property and your tenants continue to pay down this new, loan that you've taken out through the refi. Or what you could do as well is just use the cash flow. And like right now, cash flow is, what did I say, $430 a month. By the time it's paid off in 20 years, let me do the math real quick here. It would cash flow approximately, let's say, $2,000 a month. So
That's with no principal and interest anymore. And
yeah, so the
and
gross is
future rents.
24. Yeah, so gross future rents would be 2,400, but then take, property taxes, insurance, you're still going to have to pay those, property management fees, things like that. So roughly it would be net $2,000 a month of cash flow, which maybe use that for the college fund, right, to pay for college. So, and all of that is $40,000 out of pocket, not 250 or whatever would be needed to compound to the 315 that I said. And all while, getting 20 years of cash flow, right, on this
And
property.
you're not having to contribute money out of your paychecks every year to continue to grow and accrue the money that, would go into that piggy bank. That's the thing with the 529. If you don't continue to contribute to it in a meaningful way, doesn't matter the compounding 18 years or not and how well those positions perform. If you have $2,000 in your 529, it's not going to be worth $300,000 in 18 years. It's just not. So,
No.
Yeah, it's a pretty strong
Yeah,
argument.
the
to
other way I
make.
look at it is basically having, tenants pay for a kid's college. I like that idea.
Yeah. While providing them a nice place to live, and maybe also your kids, this is a whole separate episode, but your kids might be inclined towards at least learning or understanding the power of real estate investing if they see that this one single house paid for their entire college, whether or not they're interested in becoming landlords or 20-minute investors or not. At a minimum, they'll understand or draw some parallel between this asset and this outcome, which is a cool.
Yeah, my 7-year-old has already started asking questions about this stuff, because he sees me do this thing sitting next to them in the morning while I drink my coffee and they have their breakfast, and I do my 20 minutes a day of real estate stuff. And they ask me questions. So they're already getting exposed, and, I can explain and talk to some of this stuff. So absolutely right.
I love that. All right. Well, we only have 5 minutes left for what you called the more controversial topic, which is the interest-only payments on the primary residence. So let's see what we can unpack in 5 minutes.
Yeah. I mean, I think because it's primary residence, every situation is, different. It's individual to the person, the family, the situation, or whatever. This is what we chose to do, not right or wrong. It's just our preferred or our choices and our preferred way to go about this. And it's actually pretty straightforward. Like, there's a few things that went into our, ultimately deciding to go about it this way. Is one, where my wife and I are very confident that this is not going to be our forever home where we retire, where we live forever. So in that sense, owning a house, flat out, maybe not the best thing to do. I was going to say, maybe more importantly, I don't know if it's more important or not, but one of the things that we were trying to do is to minimize and lower as much as we possibly can our monthly expenses, so that we can take whatever's left and put it into rental real estate. So buy more rentals and more real estate to ultimately give ourselves a better future. So instead of having a super high mortgage, because I'm in the Bay Area, expensive homes and all this stuff, much rather have a lower one for a property that we're not going to, spend the rest of our lives in. But in the meantime, buy more rental properties. And the way I thought about it is like, we're buying more rental properties that are generating cash flow with what we are not putting towards an amortizing mortgage, that if we change our minds in, 5, 10, 15 years and be like, no, we absolutely want to stay here forever, we have a rental portfolio that we can leverage to pay down this primary residence of ours, or sell a rental to pay for part of our mortgage. So we have optionality again. Whereas if we were maxing out our monthly expenses because we had an amortizing mortgage and not be able to purchase rentals on the side, then we wouldn't have the optionality. So that's really what it is.
I think it's pretty simple at the surface when you explain it like that. One question about these products, so I think most people don't even consider or think about the idea of an interest-only payment on a primary residence. Is this a common product? Is this, how long is the interest-only period? Is this something anybody could go find at their local credit union, or how does it work?
Very common. You can find it anywhere: banks, credit unions, mortgage brokers. You just tell them that that's what you want.
It's non-obvious to people, right? This idea of doing interest-only payments. So like, is there a certain fixed period of time that you have interest only?
Yeah, sorry. So you could choose. There's, 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, 15 years. You can find whatever. They don't typically do 30, that I've seen at least. They don't typically do 30-year like interest only, mortgages or loans. But you have other options: 10, 7, 5. I think I've seen 3 as well. So you could pick and choose. Yes, you take the risk that, whatever that length of the term is, if you're still in the property, you need to refinance to another interest only loan, and the interest rates will be whatever they are then, or you sell or you move or whatever. So that's a risk you're taking. But I think it's also, and maybe because both my wife and I grew up in Europe. So my wife's French, I grew up in Switzerland. And I think there's a very different mindset in Europe as well around all this stuff. And what I've noticed, like culturally in the United States, it feels very much like for most people, a goal in life is to pay off their home and own their home, flat out. In Europe, it's diametrically opposed. It's like nobody ever cares or wants to own their home. The bank, they have payments their entire lives, and you just pay your mortgage, and it's pretty much interest only the entire lives, and they don't, own the house flat out ever. You just refinance, every time you need to. So I think we also grew up getting accustomed to that, maybe, which makes it easier for us to do here. I don't know.
No, it's interesting to think about the different perspectives people have across the world. My family's from, my dad's side of the family's from Bangladesh. Same thing. Home ownership is thought about completely differently there. Mm-hmm. And the idea of appreciation and all these different like leveraging loan products is just it's not part of the way people think. And if it is, it's different. It's a different attitude. So there's that perspective element. And then also I ran these numbers 2 days ago. I looked back at 2024 and I looked at the principal pay down on my rental portfolio, and tenants had paid down $33,000 in principal in 2024. And when I think about that, the idea of, okay, well, like I think I only paid down something like $2,800 of principal on my primary or something insane, because we're at the year one of a new loan at a high interest rate. And I'm like, okay, well, which one's more powerful in the long run? And would it actually be, to your point, more impactful if we didn't make those smaller principal payments and had a lower monthly payment that we could then use to reinvest back into things that we already know how to do? So I love the logic behind it. I think it's the theme of this is that it's actually simpler. The math behind both of the things we talked about today are actually simpler than most people realize. It's just not obvious. These aren't obvious things that are talked about openly. They all come with their risks for sure. And they all come with like different downsides to consider and be aware of. But at the end of the day, the math is pretty, it speaks for itself.
Yeah. And I'm sure somebody's going to, comment or, take the opposing opinion. And that's why I said, fine. I'm not saying right or wrong, but it's personal and individual, right? That's what works for us. And then for somebody else, something else might work, right? But it is, I think to your point of what you're saying, it is an option that people should be aware of so that they can think about their life, finances, goals, holistically.
Yep. 100%. Well, thanks for peeling back the curtain and letting us see a little bit behind the logic of these decisions. I know they're, like you said, they're personal finance decisions, but I learned a lot, when we first talked about it, and I learned even more from this conversation. So appreciate it, and we will see everyone again next week.
Sounds good. Take care.
Thank you for making it to the end of today's episode. As you may know, podcasts are very difficult to grow organically. If you're getting value from today's episode, I'd deeply appreciate if you can take 30 seconds to leave my show a 5-star rating and review. This will go a long way to helping me reach more listeners just like you. Thank you so much in advance.